Sharing personal details at the best of times can be daunting. It can draw inordinate attention to your foibles. Similarly, many prominent figures, from politicians to prominent CEOs, have, either accidentally or intentionally, had to publicly own up to their struggles with addiction. The question is, should they or should they have to? Joining us now for their perspectives, in St. Peter, Minnesota, via Skype, Peg O'Connor. She's a professor of philosophy and gender, women, and sexuality studies at Gustavus Adolphus College. And with us here in studio, Edward Keenan, senior editor at The Grid, and George Smitherman, former Deputy Premier and Health Minister for the province of Ontario. And it's good to see you two guys here in the studio again. Peg, nice to meet you. And I guess we should clarify off the top, Peg, even though you're from Minnesota, it really is St. Peter, not St. Paul, Minnesota you're coming from, right? You're not in the Twin Cities.
St. Peter, that's correct.
Got it, okay. We just had Jovita Bydłowska on the program discussing this new book, Drunk Mom, which is getting so much attention, the first year of her son's life and how she relapsed into drinking again. And the reaction to her book seems to be very split among those who think it was a very brave and constructive thing that she came out, to others saying, you're being just an exhibitionist and shame on you for doing all this. Let's just start there. Peg, what do you make of the reaction to the book so far?
You know, the reaction doesn't surprise me. I think it's typical of women, particularly around motherhood, that we're caught in a double bind, that we can never be the best mother possible, and the standards for us being the worst possible mother are fairly low. So she's written this very brutal, raw memoir about her first year as a mother, and she is being pilloried as if she's the second coming of Medea.
George?
Well, I thought it was, on the one hand, brave, because to come clean about something that is intensely private does take a certain amount of courage. But like any memoir, you're struck really by all of those that are also impacted. And I couldn't help, I think, especially perhaps as a new dad, or a relatively new dad, thinking about the implications of such a telling memoir on the kid eventually and on those personal relationships. But I think it does take a lot of courage to put that on the line.
Edward?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be both. I think it can be really revealing and raw, and that there can be an element of exhibitionism there, or just oversharing, and at the same time, that oversharing might take bravery, and it might ultimately be helpful. But I mean, for a memoirist, I think that's what we expect, is for them to look closely at the unflattering details of their lives and share them with us, right? Let
me ask a question I already know the answer to, but it will help bring it all out. Have you had addiction issues in the past?
Yeah, I'm a drunk. And I've continued to have addiction issues right up into this year, and it's a difficult thing for me to talk about, but I wrote about it recently because the subject was addiction, alcoholism, and I couldn't figure out how to be honest about my impressions about it without being honest about myself.
You say you're a drunk. Does that mean you cannot take a drink at all anymore?
Yeah, I don't. It doesn't work out well for me at all, or for anybody around me. It works out perhaps worse for the people around me.
And why did you decide to go public about it and write about it?
Well, there was reports recently that Rob Ford, the mayor of Toronto, who I spent a lot of time writing about, that his staff thought he had an issue with alcohol, and that he needed to deal with it, and I couldn't figure out how to write about that. First of all, because I don't know the details of his personal life, but also my impressions from the reports that I was hearing were all formed by my own experiences, and there was just no way. I could have ignored the subject, I guess, but that didn't feel like it would be helpful either. So instead, I wrote sort of about what I don't know, which is the details of Rob Ford's personal life, and what I do know, which is how the public reports about his life relate to my own experience.
No disrespect to you as I ask George the next question, but you went public with some issues in your past while you were a politician, which has obviously much more significant implications than it would for Edward or for Jovita, because well, just everything is bigger and louder and stronger and everything when you do something like this in public life. Tell us about when you went public with your issues.
Well, my issues were related to drug addiction, and especially a period of about 5 or 6 years in my life in the 1990s, before I was elected, but already engaged in politics. I think as a gay man, I'd already, in a certain sense, enjoyed, if you will, the liberation of coming out. And therefore, in a sense, I already had at least some sense that being liberated and bringing information like that into the public domain would have value to me. And this was my motivation for doing it. I didn't really plan it in particular, but I was sitting at a table about to be called up to the stage at the Courage to Come Back Awards, put on every year by CAMH, which celebrates the lives of people who have dealt with their struggles related to addiction or mental health. And they had these massive, I think they must have been 12 or 14 feet high, the words courage spelled out. And I just said to myself, I really can't mount the stage and bring the traditional greetings as a minister of health and be a hypocrite. And I didn't really come out too candidly. I said, as one who has experienced the wrong side of too many sunrises, you know, I can relate to the challenges that many of the people in this room are dealing with, and I'm, you know, privileged to commend the people for the courage that they've shown. But one of the recipients that night was a Toronto Star columnist, a reporter, and she quite intuitively followed up the next day, and so the story began.
So the story began. So you had not had a chance, obviously, ahead of time to consult with staff or the Premier's office or anything to say...
Or my mother.
Or your mother, who didn't know.
Right.
So all of this hit the front page of the Toronto Star. I remember, it was a big deal, big picture.
Yeah.
And what was the fallout?
I was in Northern Ontario that day, so relatively the bigger fallout for Premier McGuinty, I suppose. But true to every moment that I ever spent with him, he was first and foremost a human being. And really, on that day when I created, you know, a headache for him that he didn't need, he was only, I should say to me at least, only interested in me. And, you know, overall the response was, you know, was quite positive. And, you know, to the point that Christina Blizzard from the Toronto Sun, you know, wrote a column that said, okay, enough already of giving this guy credit for his period of life when he was doing illegal activities, etc. And I actually took, you know, I kind of took a bit of direction from her on that point, on this notion of kind of over-informing people or getting too granular about, you know, what the hell this life of drugs amounted to. But, you know, for me it was fundamentally liberating and empowering, and the letters that I received and the emails that I received from people, young gay men struggling with addiction and saying, you know, I found some comfort in that or what have you, even just one letter like that makes it all worthwhile.
Peg, what can you tell us about the experience in the United States of, for example, high-profile politicians or executives who decide to go public on an issue that is controversial? Let's just put it that way. What's the experience on that?
Well, I think it's something about how the public responds to it. I mean, we live in a world in which entertainment and news, that line is blurred. And so when a public official comes out and says, I've got this addiction problem, it's newsworthy, but in some ways it's also treated as entertainment. And that's not the good news, because it takes away from the seriousness of addiction. So I think that public officials who do come out as struggling with addiction, they do have some responsibility to treat it very seriously and make sure that the press treats it very seriously and not as a circus sideshow, I'd say.
Sure. Edward, we had, you know, Jovita's situation, we have George's situation, Michael Bryant, who was another member of the McGuinty government, who, after he departed public life, wrote a memoir in which he confessed that he had alcoholism issues to deal with as well. Do you think it's important, warts and all, to share these, what can be classified as unflattering moments in your life?
I think it can be important, and I think, as George said, it can be helpful to the person doing the sharing as much as anything. I think when you have an addiction, when you're an alcoholic or a drug addict, you spend a lot of your life hiding that away, right? Covering up for it. And I think a lot of recovery, and most of the 12-step recovery programs, sort of coming face to face with that is a big part of the process. Not lying to yourself anymore and not lying to other people. And if you have a public life, then not lying to the public is also part of that. However, and I think that it can also be useful to people who are either still struggling with addiction problems to see that you know, they're not the only one, right? And that there are other people who've done things as bad as you, who've been down there and that emerge, you know, from the other side. But yeah, I mean, I think to be effective, it has to, you have to be worried about exactly that kind of circus sideshow element of it, because you don't want to be, part of that honesty is not glamorizing it, not pretending that it was just a, you know, too many sunrises and too much of a good time, because it's a bad time for
George,
most of
I'm
us.
trying to remember now. 1999, your first election? 1999, Michael Bryant's first election also? So you guys were in politics together from the beginning. Did you know he had an alcohol problem? No. You didn't know. You sat at the cabinet table with him, you didn't know.
Yeah, and I said to him later, I said, you know, as Toronto members also, like if you're an MPP and you come into Toronto from outside Toronto, you have a different life during the week than a Toronto MPP. Michael and I had our homes and our constituencies and expectations. But I said to him, it's funny because I had no clue. We were pretty close. Our ridings were adjacent to each other. Our offices were adjacent to each other. I said, I can't remember that you and I have ever even had a drink together. And he said, well, you know, that really was the pattern of my drinking, that a lot of his drinking was in isolation. And I recognize also that a lot of my drug use was in isolation, and that there's a certain kind of I think feature of escapism to it. And politics is already a lonely life.
You've referred to your drug use, and I just want to give you the chance to clarify. What kind of drugs, if you want to say, were you dealing with?
You know, I describe these as, you know, gay party drugs, drugs that were available in a scene, and I've never. On this point about trying to find the line between being forthright about a challenge that I experienced and dealt with, and not being an exhibitionist about it and giving people every ounce of detail, I haven't been more express than that. And I'm not going to be today.
Okay, that's fair enough.
I might be in a memoir if I can ever actually get past that part about the people that you kind of burn as you write it. You express, hey, here's all my personal views, and you know, it's a really, really sensitive subject, obviously, the implications that it has on others that are around you.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big issue, I think, particularly for people who've been through a conventional recovery program or who are in one, or even if it's unconventional, is that like stop hurting people is one of the big rules, right? And you don't do things anymore if it will cause more damage. And you worry when you're sharing your story that you're sharing other people's story too, and that they should have some say in how much of that gets out there.
Well, they do, and you know, people worry, and they've raised these things with me.
Peg, this does get back to the drunk mum issue, the book that Jovita wrote, because of course she does talk about her child, although she changes his name in the book, and she does refer to her significant other, who is a well-known personality in some parts of this country, although she does not name him in the book. And I wonder how problematic is it when people come out with their stories, which are designed to be open about themselves and perhaps help others, when there are other people who are part of this story as well?
Mm-hmm. There are, and I don't know the answer to this question, maybe you do, but did her partner read the manuscript?
He did indeed. He did, and was supportive throughout, apparently.
Then in some ways that's his giving a permission for her to write and publish that. Nothing accidentally appears in a memoir. It's very intentional. And the fact that her partner has supported her in writing and publishing this memoir, to me, says an awful lot about the importance of her story, and that her story is in part his story and their child's story. And at some point, yes, their child will need to deal with this, and she'll need to deal with her son when he's old enough to understand the implications of her writing this memoir.
Well, that's
the kind of honesty.
That's the follow-up I want to hear from you on. That's the follow-up I want to hear from you on, because it's one thing for her significant other to give his permission and be helpful. He's of the age of majority. This kid is a little kid, and someday, presumably, this little kid's going to read this book. One wonders whether or not he may be traumatized by reading about the world in which he was born into. And by world, I mean, under his roof. What do you think?
Is it theoretically possible? Yes, I think it is. But are children traumatized by the actions of their active alcoholic or drug-using parents all the time? Yes, they are. I mean, what seems to be different here is that it's published in a book, and other people have access to it. I'm more curious about the kinds of pressure that will be put on the child by others who read the book, asking how harmed are you by this? Huh. So, I mean, I think there's a separate issue there.
Interesting. George, your kids are very young now. How old are they?
My daughter will turn 3 in July, and my son will turn 5 in December.
Okay.
And I'm very young too, Riz.
Of course. Do you think about a day, though, when they may want to go look up and see what Dad did back in the day and come upon these stories?
Yeah, but I think in keeping with the trend line, I'll be looking for that. I'll be looking for that day. So I mean, it's really, I think, about when is it appropriate to fill in details about my life on all variety of subjects. So quite naturally we'll address that forthrightly.
I don't know. Have you got kids?
I do. I have three kids.
What have you got? How old?
I have a 7-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 19-month-old.
So they're too young to understand the first thing that you said on tonight's program, which is, I'm a drunk.
Yeah, no, I mean, they know that I don't drink alcohol, though, and especially the 7-year-old.
Do they know why?
Yeah.
The 7-year-old
I mean, they
knows
don't
why.
know. He doesn't know all the details. He just knows that that I have a problem with it, and that I react badly, and that I can't stop. I mean, we've had enough conversations about it that I think he understands as much as a 7-year-old needs to understand about it. But, I mean, this is when we're talking about Drunk Mom, the book. I've been having a hard time understanding in the other media reports what exactly people's fears about the child are, because he's not implicated in the misbehavior. It's something that happened, and I think the thing is that if my children will be embarrassed or troubled, or to know that I was a different person before they were born, or to know that I was a different person before they can remember.
It's not forgive me, it's not similar.
Yeah.
I mean, the concern in Jovita's case is that after she gave birth, her alcoholism, how do I say this, presented itself again.
Yeah.
She went off the wagon, she started to drink again,
Yeah.
and that child was in her care. Oftentimes, she was the only caregiver,
Yeah.
and she was drunk.
I understand that.
That's the big difference.
Yeah, I understand that.
And that's a hard thing for a kid to read about his or her mom.
Maybe,
potentially.
But I mean, coming to grips with a lot of childhood things is a hard thing to understand, right? But like our parents are fully formed human beings with big problems, and at a certain point we start to realize that, and that can be a difficult thing. But I don't think trying to cover it up or trying to hide it somehow makes it more healthy. It makes it easier or better.
Double standard peg for women on this one?
I think there is a double standard for women, absolutely. I think history is replete with male alcoholic fathers who were terrible fathers. And, you know, there is this genre now of mothers talking about their drinking. I mean, the mothers I know who drink or who have drunk did so in isolation and with great shame. And I think a book like this is important because it speaks to women and these experiences. They are real. These experiences are very real. And perhaps was hers a more extreme end of the spectrum? Yes, but together all these stories help women to see some common elements that can be incredibly liberating and helpful, and to see that she started to do it differently again. Maybe I could do it differently again. But I think there is very much a double standard for women.
I guess the assumption, Peg, is that if a man drinks and is out of commission because of it, well, at least his wife or significant other is there to pick up the pieces. And the other assumption is that if a woman does it, the man is not there to pick up the pieces. Maybe there's a double standard in a double way on this.
Well, yes, and it's a double whammy. I mean, the assumption that a mother would be able to pick up the slack for an absentee or drunken father, there are plenty of cases of that for sure. But as you say, the reverse doesn't necessarily hold. So I'm curious, you know, what the public is saying when they aren't busy, you know, criticizing her for exhibitionism and this, you know, raw, brutal honesty. What they're saying about her male partner as father.
George, let me again take you back to the time when you went public with your issues. Did you hear from any other politicians in the country at that time who said, boy, you got the guts to do something that I just can't do and won't do, and I've got a problem too, and I wish I could?
No.
Never did. Corporate executives, high-profile people?
More typically, well, I think that lots of people said, good on you. The response was strong, and it was almost universally positive, and it was good on you, you know, good courage, demystifying, breaking down barriers, and all of that stuff. more of the personal side where people were individually touched who were struggling with addiction, for me, I would say was from young gay men.
But let's be candid about this as well. There were whispers in the corridors of Queen's Park of people who would say, there goes George again with his attention-seeking behavior. I mean, you know that was out there too, right?
I thought that was called opposition.
But you know what I'm saying. There were people who thought, wow, look at the real estate this guy got for going public about something. Front page, Toronto Star, quite the treatment. That tick you off?
No, I mean, that's politics, Steve. I mean, if that takes you, that's the nature of politics. Wake up in the morning and look to squeeze a negative slant out of every damn word you hear. Look for the spin in every comment that's offered. That's just political life. So no, I live, that's what I'm recovering from now, in a sense, is a positive headspace.
Recovering politicians.
That's the world of politics. If you're getting some advantage, even people that are on the same side as you find a reason not to like that. That's just politics.
Quite true. Edward, you wanted to say?
No, I was just going to say that if you've struggled through addiction and it has become a real problem in your life, then the day when you have a problem that people think the celebrations of your recovery are your biggest black mark is a good day, right? Like, if you got to be criticized for something, being sober and clean is not a bad thing to be criticized for, right? Like, I don't know.
Peg, I wonder, do you think it's a bit of a disincentive to high-profile people in your country, be they corporate executives or entertainers or politicians, whatever, to come forward and share their struggles, knowing that somebody is going to say, you know what, this is just Lindsay Lohan's attempt to revive her flagging career, that kind of thing. Do you know what I mean?
I think there's a disincentive for some, but I think the people who are in recovery, who are sober, who see their story as being helpful for others, who are grateful and are telling their stories with a kind of humility, not about self-aggrandizement, not about exhibitionism, that I think that they find it a good thing to do. And I can't remember who said, I think it was George, about getting a letter from someone thanking you for what you've done or how you've helped a complete stranger, that makes it all worthwhile. And I think that there are more people who are willing to do that. As much as there is a sideshow quality for some, I think for many others there's more acceptance about addiction now.
It's not the case necessarily in politics, but certainly in show business there gets to be a feeling, particularly with all these supper hour syndicated talk shows and so on, that if you're a celebrity and you haven't fessed up to something this week, you're doing something wrong in terms of promoting your career. I mean, that's out there, isn't it?
I think it is out there. And again, to me, that's the blurry line between news and entertainment. How are you going to get yourself on the television? Oh, well, let me claim that I have this addiction that's caused me to do something terrible. Right. I mean, that's just too easy and too pat, and does a real disservice to people who are genuinely struggling with addiction.
Right. Edward, earlier in the program we talked about this piece that you wrote for The Grid about Rob Ford, and I just want to quote a couple of paragraphs from it right now.
Sure.
This is from the March edition. The personal is political. When it comes to Rob Ford, Toronto's mayor, you can't separate the personal from the political. His personal foibles were part of his populist appeal from the beginning. They help form his everyman political persona. And he is the political representative of the city. The sad circus that he stars in, no matter what causes it, infects every element of Toronto's politics. So if Rob Ford has a problem, whatever it is, we as a city have a problem. It can't be compartmentalized and ignored. I sincerely hope he acknowledges it and deals with it, whatever the issue may be, for his own sake, for the sake of his family, of his friends and supporters, and for the sake of the rest of us who he represents too. I wonder if you had a hard time writing any of that, given that nobody's really gone on the record around the Ford family or Brain Trust saying that this guy has a problem.
He's denied it outright, and his brother.
And everybody
has too.
does.
Yeah, and I'm
behavior
willing,
in public
I'm willing
notwithstanding.
to acknowledge, and I think earlier in the column, I think I made it very clear that I don't know what the source of Rob Ford's problem is. It may be an addiction problem, it may not be, right? But he has some kind of problem. Things keep emerging from his personal life and his conduct of his public duties that cause scandals. And it's not normal that you just get thrown out of hockey games, that people complain about your behavior on that kind of regular basis, right? And so whether it's an alcohol problem or whether it's a different kind of problem, something in his personal life is causing is causing a lot of things, and he needs to deal with that, or I think he needs to deal with that. I wish he would, but again, I mean, I tried carefully in the column to frame it as part of why I talked about my own situation is because that I know a lot more about that than I know about Rob Ford's personal situation. Rob Ford hasn't returned a phone call of mine in several years. But you know, he obviously has personal foibles that constantly make it into the front pages. The 911 calls, the episodes at parties, his staff talking to people.
He has a controversial personal life.
And I think, you know, if you're in a position like the mayor is, then you need to get a handle on that.
Peg, you won't know this because you don't follow the minutiae of Ontario politics or Toronto politics, but George Smitherman, who's sitting at this table today, came second in the last mayoralty contest to the man we're talking about right now. And George, I gotta believe there are days you wake up and say to yourself, I can't believe I lost to this guy. Given what a train wreck sometimes his life appears to be.
Yeah, well, more often I wake up and say, you know, thank God I don't have to worry about that or worry about this. It cuts both. No,
really?
Sure. I mean, you have to take some joy from the liberation. I wanted the job. Yeah. People suggested I should try my hand at something else, and I accept that. I think it cuts both ways. Sure, because on paper I was supposed to win, but I think that there is an everyman quality, which you wrote about in your piece there, that I witnessed him connecting with people in a way that on paper didn't make any sense to me. So I think he's I think he's an underestimated politician, and I think that he's I think that he's cagey like a fox, and that operating within a very, very narrow and set parameter, he's got message discipline and he's quite effective at it. And those didn't really seem like characteristics things that I would be saying about the guy when I first began to face off against him. And I think that's why he's more enduring and offers the prospect of being more enduring as a mayor than a lot of downtown people in Toronto have figured out.
Right. George, I got about 40 seconds left here, and Edward told us how he has dealt with his addiction. He just stops drinking. What was your strategy for kicking what your problem was?
I think that it was a combination of things. It was medical assistance. It was the laying on of effective hands from medical practitioners and the assistance that they offered. It was finding some inner strength, and it was cardio.
Exercise.
Really, in a sense, I think that I could say in a way that cardio saved my life. I think walking and running has saved me possibly from diabetes on the one hand, and certainly the freedom that I found in exercise, in that kind of cardio high, or what, as different people have, endorphins, different people have explained them, was turned out to be a big piece of it for me.
Well, let me wish continued health to all of you, and thanks for coming in and helping us with this discussion tonight. Peg O'Connor on the line via Skype, St. Peter, Minnesota, from Gustavus Adolphus College. Peg, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
And Edward Keenan, the senior editor of The Grid, and of course the former Deputy Premier and Minister of Health in Ontario, George Smitherman. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.